Yaat shik edo shidene, ado yaat adeja ke do atilake, she kia ani adona initially godo bashes chin, twitter cheatney e dasha che, tskabaha e dashanella, aquat san initially. She Shaandiin Parrish Unisha, ado she Navajo Nation. Hello everyone, my name is Shaandiin Parrish and I am the current serving Miss Navajo Nation. Thank you so much for coming back for another reading segment. Today we will be reading Curious George Saves His Pennies, written by Margaret and H.R. Rays. So I am so excited to read another book about money. Last week we learned about saving money, and I found another book again about saving money. April was Financial Literacy Month, but it's always a good lesson to learn about saving money. So I just want to thank our parents and our guardians and our grandparents for sitting down with your children to listen to another book. I'd also like to thank our partners at First Things First for supporting all of our parents, our guardians, and our grandparents, and everybody that's involved in our young children's development, because again, from the age that our children are born to about 5 years old is when their brains develop the quickest, the fastest, and the most. So reading to our children helps them develop their vocabulary from the time that they start talking to about 3rd grade, and when they have an extensive speaking vocabulary by the time that they're 3rd grade, they will have a easier time learning to read, which will help their development in comprehension, which you'll see when they're in middle school and high school, and that will ultimately help them with their careers. So thank you to First Things First again for partnering with me on this video today. So let's get into reading Curious George Saves His Pennies by Margaret and H.R. Rays. George was a little monkey and always very curious, especially when he was in Tammy's toy store. There are so many things to wonder about. Pogo sticks and skateboards, snow globes and kaleidoscopes, even finger traps. But George's favorite thing to do in the toy store was play at the train table. Today, there was a new train. Its wood was painted bright red, and it had a real working whistle. George held it up to show his friend, the man with the yellow hat. "Not today," his friend said. "We're looking for a birthday present for Noah, remember? He's turning 5. What do you think of this?" George helped his friend pick out a yellow and green hula hoop, while Tammy, the shopkeeper, wrapped the present for the birthday party. George wandered back to the train table. "I have a suggestion, George," said the man as he carried the gift over. "Why don't you buy that new train yourself? The tag says $5. I'm sure you can save the money for it." George liked this suggestion so much that he was only a little sorry to put the train back down. George had a good time at the birthday party. Noah let everyone have a turn at the hula hoop. It was harder than it looked. As soon as George got home that afternoon, he took his piggy bank down from his dresser. He opened the small plug at the bottom and shook. Out tumbled a nickel. George ran to show the coin to his friend. "You have 5 cents, the man said. "I'll give you your allowance early this week. Don't spend it on candy. You have to save it up." The man gave George 2 quarters. "Here is 50 cents, he said. "Now you have 55 cents. You have only $4.45 left to save. George wasn't quite sure how much money that was, but it sounded like a lot. George dreamed about his red train that night. He was riding it through the forest of trees. He tugged on the whistle again and again so that no one could miss the shiny red engine. In the morning, George decided he would find a way to earn money faster. What if someone else were to buy the red train at the toy store before he could? He had an idea. He found 5 pennies and a dime in the sofa cushions. He found a nickel under his bed. His piggy bank jingled nicely that evening. He had 75 cents saved. One more quarter and he would have $1. The next morning, George had another idea. He would get a job. Lucky for George, his neighbor, Mr. Reddy, needed help raking leaves. George worked all morning long, gathering armfuls of red, brown, and gold leaves to add to a growing pile in the center of the yard. Mr. Reddy brought out lemonade for the two to share. While his neighbor rested on the sun porch swing, George climbed a tree. The pile of leaves looked tempting from above. George wondered what would happen if... Before he finished wondering, he had swung out of the branches and right into the center pile. The leaves crunched and crumbled and swooned and swirled. What an adventure! What hard work it was raking the leaves back up. By the end of the day, Mr. Reddy paid him $2. George had $2.75 saved. That was almost $3. George spent many days doing odd jobs. He washed windows, he distributed flyers, he delivered flowers, he did dishes. At the end of the week, George finally had $5. "I'm proud of you, George," said the man with the yellow hat. "You saved all that money by yourself. You sure earned that train." The change clinked merrily in the piggy bank as George set off for the toy store. The autumn day was bright and clear and not very cold. George walked by the park. The neighborhood children were playing with a windsock. Suddenly, it got stuck up in the tree. George carefully set his piggy bank down on a nearby park bench where he could keep an eye on it. But little monkeys sometimes forget, and as George began to play with the children, he forgot to check on his bank. He forgot to check that his bank was still there. As the afternoon wore on, his friends went home to have dinner. George rushed to the park bench where he left his piggy bank. The toy store might be closing soon, but his bank was gone. Maybe George had the wrong bench. There were many in the park after all, but he was disappointed each time he ran up to another empty bench. George walked home sadly. He wondered how long it would take him to save $5 again. As George passed the toy store, he happened to look through the window. He couldn't believe his eyes. A little girl was holding his piggy bank. George rushed into the toy store just as the girl's mother was saying, "We found this across the street and waited for its owner, but it's getting late. We saw it has the name of your store on the bottom. Can you keep it in case somebody comes to claim it?" George jumped up and down on the counter. "Why, George," said Tammy, Is the piggy bank yours? You're lucky Hannah and her mother found it." Hugging his piggy bank tightly, George rushed over to the train section. He located the shiny red engine right away. As he carried it to the counter, the little girl looked at the train shyly. George realized he had not said thank you to her for keeping his savings safe. He looked at the train, he looked at his piggy bank, he looked at Hannah. Good deeds deserve to be rewarded, he decided. George set the train down. He unpinned his piggy bank on the counter and began to sort his dollars and coins. George and Hannah walked out of the toy store that day, each carrying a train. George's small engine was not red, but it was shiny and blue, and it had been paid for it. And he had paid for it all by himself. Best of all, he had a new friend who loved to play with trains almost as much as he did. The end. That was another great book about saving money. At the end of this book, there's a piggy bank. So if you purchase this book, you can make your own little piggy bank and create a small bank for your savings. On the back of the book, it says 5 pennies equal 1 nickel, 2 nickels equal 1 dime, 2 dimes and 1 nickel equal 1 quarter, 2 dimes and 1 nickel equal a quarter, 4 quarters equal $1, 5 $1 bills equals 1 $5 bill, 2 $5 bills equal 1 $10 bill. So that's the whole book, and it is very impressive of how much information is in our book. So I just want to thank you so much for listening to another segment in our series. I look forward to you all returning in about another 2 weeks. I'll have another story out. So again, thank you so much for listening today.